I don't actually know what reality is outside my perception. Everything I experience reaches me through my senses. Light enters the eyes, sound vibrates in the ears, pressure touches the skin, smell and taste register somewhere inside the body. That's it. That's my access point to the world. And even that access is limited. Scientifically, we know that what we see is only a tiny fraction of what exists. The electromagnetic spectrum is enormous. Visible light, the colors we see, is just a narrow band of wavelengths. There are radio waves moving through this room right now, infrared radiation, ultraviolet light, signals carrying information across space. Entire layers of reality are present, and I cannot perceive them directly. For most of human history, people didn't know those layers existed. They couldn't imagine that invisible waves were passing through the air, carrying voices and images. Reality was always bigger than what they could detect. And it still is. That alone changes something, because it means that what I call the world is already incomplete. What I see, what I hear, what I feel is not the full picture. It's a filtered version, a translation. The brain takes electrical signals from the senses and constructs an internal model. I don't experience raw reality. I experience a representation, a simulation that is useful for survival. And if that's true physically, then how much else am I missing? What else is here that I simply don't have the equipment to perceive? Not just technologically, biologically. Maybe there are aspects of reality that no human nervous system can detect, and I would never know. Because I can't stop outside my own perception to compare it with something unfiltered. Everything I experience passes through the same doorway. My senses, my brain, my interpretation. I cannot access reality directly. I can only access my experience of it. And that realization is strange, because most of the time I move through life as if what I see is simply how things are. Solid, objective, certain, but is it? Or is it just the version available to this particular nervous system? In 100 years, our understanding of the universe might look primitive, just like people in the past couldn't imagine radio waves. Maybe there are dimensions of existence right now that we don't even suspect. And I find that humbling, just quietly humbling, because it softens certainty. It reminds me that what feels obvious may be partial. And if reality is already bigger than my senses can detect, then what about my interpretations? What about the meanings I attach to things? This is where it starts for me, not with philosophy, not with spirituality, just with a simple fact. I only have access to reality as it appears to me. And that difference, even if it seems small, might change everything. If my access to reality is already limited by my senses, then something else becomes even more unsettling. Even within this limited slice of the world that I can perceive, I still don't experience it neutrally. Two people can stand in the same room, hear the same sentences, witness the same event, and walk away with completely different realities. One feels respected, the other feels insulted. One feels safe, the other feels threatened. The external situation is identical. The internal experience isn't. So what is happening there? Because the difference isn't in the light. It isn't in the sound waves. It isn't in the physical environment. The difference is in interpretation. And interpretation happens so fast that it feels automatic, almost invisible. A facial expression becomes disapproval. A pause becomes rejection. A short message becomes distance. But those meanings aren't floating in the air. They're constructed. And when I really look at it, I see that my brain is not passively receiving reality. It is constantly predicting. It is using past experiences to anticipate what something means. If I've experienced rejection before, my system may scan for it. If I've felt unsafe before, my perception may lean toward the threat. If I've doubted myself before, I may hear criticism even where none was intended. And it doesn't feel like interpretation, it feels like truth. That's the strange part. My perception doesn't arrive labeled as this is your subjective filter. It arrives labeled as this is what happened. And so I defend it. I build arguments around it. I justify it. Because it feels solid. But when I slow down, I realize something uncomfortable. I'm not only seeing the world, I'm seeing the world through memory, through the identity, through accumulated emotion, through everything I've lived. Out of millions of bits of information available at any moment, my brain selects only a few. And that selection is influenced by what I fear, what I desire, what I believe about myself. So maybe I'm not reacting to reality, maybe I'm reacting to a version of reality that has already been shaped by the past. And this shaping happens below awareness most of the time. It's efficient, it helps survival, but it also creates distortion. And then I start asking myself, if my perception is filtered like this, and yours is filtered like that, are we ever fully meeting each other? Or are two internal worlds interacting? Two histories, two nervous systems, two private interpretations. Maybe that's why conflict feels so intense, because when someone challenges my interpretation, it doesn't feel like they're challenging an opinion, it feels like they're challenging reality itself. But maybe they're just defending their own lens, and I'm defending mine. And underneath both of us, there is something much quieter, but we rarely pause long enough to notice it. Most of the time we're absorbed in the story, absorbed in the emotional reaction, absorbed in being right. And the more certain I feel, the less curious I become. Because certainty feels strong, but it might just be familiarity. Familiar patterns repeating, familiar interpretations activating, and I start to see something else. If I cannot access raw reality physically, and I cannot experience situations psychologically without filters, then what I call my world is already a construction. Not false, not imaginary, but constructed, shaped, selected, interpreted. And that realization doesn't make me powerless. It makes me cautious. Cautious about how quickly I conclude. Cautious about how firmly I defend. Cautious about how certain I feel. Because maybe what feels absolute is simply deeply conditioned. And if that's true, then the world I see isn't just out there, it's also in here. If my perception of the world is filtered, then I start wondering about something even more intimate. What about the one who is perceiving? What about the sense of me? Most of the time I feel like I am my thoughts, right? They appear in my head and I say, that's me thinking. But if I slow down for a moment, I notice something strange. A thought appears and I can observe it, which means the thought and the awareness of the thought are not identical. There is the sentence forming, and then there is something that knows that sentence is forming. There is worry, and then there is awareness of worry. There is anger, and then there is awareness of anger. So what is that awareness? Because the voice in the head is loud. It comments, it judges, it predicts, it compares, it narrates everything. From the moment I wake up, it starts. Planning the day, replaying the past, anticipating conversations, defending imaginary arguments. And it rarely stops. It creates a continuous sense of identity, a storyline, a character called me. But if I pay attention carefully, the thoughts are always changing. Opinions change, beliefs evolve, emotions rise and fall. The content shifts constantly, yet something remains, something stable enough to notice the shifting. And that's difficult to explain because it's not an object. I can't see it. I can't describe its shape. It's more like a space. A silent background in which everything appears. Thought appears in it, emotion appears in it, sensation appears in it. And when I don't notice this background, I become completely fused with whatever appears. If anger appears, I'm angry. If fear appears, I'm afraid. If a thought says you're not enough, it feels like truth. But when there is even a small moment of awareness, something subtle happens. The anger is still there, but it is seen. The fear is still there, but it is noticed. The thought is still there, but it is recognized as a thought. And that small distance changes the texture of experience, not the content, the texture. Because instead of being completely absorbed, there is space. And in that space, there is less urgency, less automatic reaction. And I started realizing how much of my life is lived in identification with the voice in my head. The voice that is constantly constructing meaning, constantly reinforcing identity. I am this kind of person, I am treated this way, this always happens to me. It builds continuity. But is that continuity solid? Or is it maintained by repetition? If the voice stopped for a moment, would I disappear? Or would something still remain? Sometimes, in very quiet moments, the narration slows down, and what's left is simple experience. Sound, breath, sensation, no commentary, just presence. That feels more stable than the story. The story is loud, but unstable. It shifts based on mood, based on circumstance, based on who I'm talking to. But awareness itself doesn't argue. It doesn't need to be right. It doesn't defend itself. It just allows. And I'm not saying I live in that awareness all the time. Most of the time I'm back in the narrative, back in interpretation, back in identity. But the fact that I can notice the narrative means it's not the whole of me. And that changes something fundamental. Because if I'm not identical to every thought, then I don't have to believe every thought. If I'm not identical to every emotion, then I don't have to become every emotion. And that doesn't remove pain. It doesn't remove difficulty, but it creates space around it. And maybe that space is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from life, but freedom from total identification with the mental story about life. And then another question appears. If I cannot access reality unfiltered, if my perception is shaped by memory, if my identity is maintained by narrative, then what is truly solid? What is undeniably real? Maybe not the interpretation, maybe not the story, maybe only this. This immediate experience, before it is named, before it is judged, before it becomes mine. Just this appearing now. If all of this is true, if I don't have direct access to reality as it is, if my perception is filtered by memory, if my identity is shaped by narrative, if thoughts are constantly constructing meaning, then something very simple becomes clear. Most of what I experience as my world is interpretation layered on top of raw sensation. And most of the time, I don't notice the layering. I just live inside it. Inside conclusions, inside assumptions, inside predictions, and life keeps moving. Now, always now, there is something sobering about that. Life doesn't wait for clarity. It doesn't pause while I argue with the past. It doesn't slow down while I rehearse the future. It continues, moment by moment, and at some point it ends. That part is unavoidable. Sooner or later, the thoughts stop. The interpretations stop. The story stops. And when I look at it honestly, awareness doesn't change that. It doesn't promise permanence. It doesn't guarantee meaning. It doesn't solve mortality. The ending remains the same. But something does change. This moment. Because when I'm completely absorbed in thought, I'm rarely here. I'm in yesterday or tomorrow, or in a version of events that hasn't even happened, and the body reacts as if those imagined realities are real. Stress appears, tension builds, emotions escalate, all from a story But when awareness returns, even briefly, there is a shift. The story may still be there, the problems may still be there, the uncertainty is still there, but the extra layer softens. Instead of being fully inside the narrative, there is space around it. And in that space, there is something surprisingly simple. Breathing, sound in the room, a light on the wall, the feeling of the body sitting here. Nothing dramatic, nothing mystical, just direct experience. And that experience doesn't argue. It doesn't need to be right. It doesn't compare itself to someone else's reality. It just is. Maybe that's why presence feels calm. Not because life is resolved, but because interpretation pauses. And when interpretation pauses, reality becomes lighter, not smaller, not meaningless, just immediate. And maybe that's enough. Not as a belief, not as a philosophy, not as a conclusion, just as something you can notice. Right now, before the next thought appears, before the next story forms, before the next reaction builds. Just this. You're here, breathing, aware, and whatever reality ultimately is, this experience is happening now, while you're still here.